Okay, so yesterday's challenge, just looking at my browser up here. Yeah, so yesterday's challenge was to do this to-do list. So hopefully you guys were able to at least start it. I know a couple of you guys mentioned maybe you guys kind of got hung up maybe on the front end portion. That is not what I want. Maybe got hung up on the front end portion or some other parts. So yeah, I think it'd be beneficial for us to kind of see from ground up building this whole application. And then if you guys have any questions at any point, obviously definitely ask. But yeah, let's kind of just get right into it. So first thing I'll do is fork this over. I don't think I've done it yet. Yeah, so we'll add, authentication. So I know that was a new concept we talked about this week. Also employ some Django REST framework to kind of make our coding easier. We looked at that on Friday a bit, but definitely get to have more practice. All right, so I fork this over, gonna grab the URL. So git clone to-do lists. All right, cool. And code. All right, so I'm gonna grab this window, shift it over that far. Okay, so let me know if you guys have trouble seeing that. Hopefully it should be large enough. All right, so we have nothing to start with here. We have a README, which we definitely should read, and then our Git project. But we actually need to create our front end and back end folders here. So let's kind of take a quick gander of what we need to do. So it looks like we need to create on our back end some models that can accomplish items. So we're going to be creating tasks and probably a task list as models. And then on our front end, we should obviously allow our users to CRUD tasks to our task list. All right, so kind of just thinking about models, let's kind of dive right into it. So first thing I want to do is create my backend project. So yes, when I did this on Monday, I think I separated my front end and back end into different VS codes. But I think in this case, it makes sense to kind of tie it in together. So I'll create a new folder called backend. And we can get started. Okay, so first thing I'll do, as always with our Django projects, we want to do Python -m, create a virtual environment. So I'll do that right now. Okay, and then after that, we want to actually get into a virtual environment. So again, hopefully we've done this enough where you guys are super familiar with this process. All right, so I'm in my virtual environment and noticing that's prepended. Let me make my font a little larger. All right, there we go. So yeah, so I'm creating my backend project. So we need to install Django. So now that I'm in my virtual environment, I can do pip install Django. And there's a few other items I'm going to use. I can kind of chain them on here. PsychoPG, because I'm using Postgres. So that's what we need for Postgres database interaction. Probably Django course headers. And then there might be something else I need. I'm not going to deploy it to Heroku right now, so I'll leave off Django Heroku. What else do we normally use? I guess authentication stuff. So we'll probably need REST framework and REST framework JWT. All right, so let's do pip install Django REST framework. Okay. What else do we need? Let's forget the JWT part. So Tuesday's curriculum went over JWT, so I need that installed also. So do pip install Django REST framework -JWT. All right, so always kind of good to remember after you install these libraries to create a requirements.txt. This is so that if anyone else checks out your project, they can automatically know what libraries you're using. So we'll do that right now before we forget. So we'll do a pip freeze and write it out to a requirements.txt. All right, so notice, I guess I'm not in my backend folder, so I'm actually gonna undo all this. Sorry for this. Guess I could toss that in there. Okay, so I actually want to be in my backend folder, which is what I forgot to do. Deactivate. so I'm going to recreate my virtual environment folder within my backend folder. So it's not in the right location. Source, do that again. All right, so we're back in our virtual environment. So now that I had my requirements.txt created, I can just use that to reinstall these items since I deleted my virtual environment before. -r requirements.txt. All right, so that shouldn't take too long. While that's going, I'm actually going to create my front end folder. So I can do multiple things here. Front end, that should not be nested. All right, so back end, again, is be our Django project. Front end will be our React project. So if I create a new bash terminal, let's actually rename these. So I'll call this front end and the other one back end. All right, so front end will be, again, React. So we could create our React project. So cd into front end. And then who remembers how to create a React project here? Let's go with, all right, go with Andrew. Andrew, go for it.
npx space to create React app.
Yep. And then my app name. So let's call this to-do list, maybe. All right, so that's obviously going to take a little longer than our Django setup, so we'll kind of let that run. All right, so now if we go into our backend folder, we should have our V&D, and now we can start our Django project. So to do that, we do Django admin, start project. We want to give it a project name, so let's just go with to-do list proj. I guess we can't use dashes. Okay, so to-do list proj will be my project folder, and then I also want to create my app folder, so I'll do that right now. Python manage.py start app, and I'll call this to-do app. Or I guess keep that list in there. All right, so we got our project folder, app folder. Another thing I want to do is create a database. So let's do that right now. Create DB. Let's call it to-do list DB. All right, so we installed Django, installed other libraries. That was course headers, Django Rust Framework, Django Rust Framework -JWT. What else do we have here? And CycloPG. So those are libraries we installed. Create a requirements.txt. Probably want to create a git ignore file while I'm at it. So git ignore. And then we could add our virtual environment there. So we'll have everything added to our project.
Quick question.
Yep.
As far as just order of operations and how to tackle the project, would it be, is there any reason, I guess, would deploying to Heroku first and then building off of that, so you're not doubling up the creating the DB and all that stuff, would that be a possibility, or is that not a good idea?
I would say that's probably not a good idea because you want to test on your local machine before deploying anything. So like pushing to Heroku is kind of like your production release. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from using that as a test because no one's using your website. But I would say it's always easier to get your localhost projects running and then testing it that way. So yeah, I guess you could push to Heroku. I think that'd just be a little more challenging to debug and do all those things.
Got it.
But yeah, again, nothing that would stop you from doing that. So developer choice, of course. Looks like I misnamed my project here. Okay, so in our backend, we have our app folder, project folder. We create our database. Let's go to our settings file and add some goodies in here.
Hey, quick question, Ankur. From a design perspective on the backend, are you planning to put user authentication and all the to-do list functionality in the to-do list app within Django, or separate them out? Does it make a difference?
In terms of design, that's a great question, actually. I think, again, we've talked about, I guess for examples, we always create one app. We could create a separate app if we plan to have a login for, if let's say we had 4 different apps and we don't want one login. I think that would make sense, yeah, to have a different app for the login. I've actually not thought of that, so maybe that's something we could do here. Yeah, maybe let's create a different project and see what challenges we run into there. or if it, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's
No,
create another app.
I was saying under the one project, like a second Django app under the to-do list.
Yep, I don't think
See
we've
it
done
every-
that much, but let's actually do that now. So let's do Python manage UI, start app, and let's create a login app. So let's call it to do list auth. All right, so create another app underscore auth. So I guess that can handle or hopefully handle our login capabilities. All right, so with that, I'm in my settings file for my project. We need to add all those apps in. So we called it to do list app, to do list auth. And since we installed cores headers, we should probably include that here. So I think it's just cores dash headers. Actually, it's one word, if I recall correctly. We also are going to use Django REST framework. So REST framework is the app we need to include. All right, so I think those are all the apps we need here. Again, hard to remember them all. Sometimes we'll have to look those up, make sure I type those correctly. I think those should be correct. When we're using cores headers, remember we need to add another section in the middleware, and that has to be above common middleware. So for this, I will need to Google it because I definitely have not memorized it. So let's do a quick Google. Cores headers.
I feel like it would be a lot easier to add this stuff if you just had a bash file that just added all of it automatically.
Perhaps. I mean, yeah, if you are eager to set that up, there's yeah, definitely could save some time if you could figure out how to automate this. But yeah,
I'm
so
not sure eager is the right word, but it definitely seems easier that way.
gotcha. Yeah, I mean, yeah, if you do something enough times, probably automating it would be something you might want to look into. But okay, cool. So again, we had to add cores headers .middleware.cores middleware above common middleware. So just remember to do that for our cores middleware. And just read documentation. Now we want to whitelist some items. So looks like we could do cores allowed origins, which is a little different than what we did before. Let's toss it at the bottom. All right, cores allowed origins. In this case, I want to do localhost. So that is without an S, local host port 3000. So again, this is the default React port, port 3000. So that's what I'm like whitelist for now. Again, if we deploy it to Heroku, we might need to change that or add on to that. All right, so again, just going for a checklist, we updated our apps. We updated our middleware for the cores headers. I think we need to update our database, which is over here. So we're going to use Postgres for this example. And then we already created our database. If you remembered our name, I think I called it to-do list _ DB. All right, so just getting all these settings kind of done with one flow. I think one last thing I need to do is for the authentication stuff. So again, there's no way I have this stuff memorized. I'm just going to use our resources. So I go to our curriculum page from yesterday. I think there's a section for us. Yep. So we did cores headers. We need to do the REST framework. So I'm going to copy this section right here so that we can copy and paste it without making typos, hopefully. Drop it in here. All right, so again, this is needed for your authentication default behavior. So we're going to be using JSON web tokens for our authentication. I think there's one more thing we need to add in here, actually, if I remember. This utils. Let's go somewhere. All right, so I'm just searching our curriculum page from yesterday because that has a lot of good stuff on it. All right, so in our settings file, we also need to add in a JWT auth section. So that's what I'm going to do right now since we're modifying our settings file. All right, so again, that was a lot of stuff. Always easy to kind of forget it, but I think we got everything we need. So with that, I think we should be good to go. Let's see. So utils project, I think that needs to be named our project. So to do list proj. Maybe we want to find it, or maybe put it in our app. Let's try off. Okay, so since we are creating this, I'm going to proceed with that. In our auth app, I'm going to create a new file called utils.py. And in that, I'm going to copy and paste this good stuff. All right, so we are copying and pasting, so we got to make sure we're doing stuff correctly. So my app is not called core. My app is going to be called to do list auth. We're going to have some serializer. That's actually going to come from somewhere else, maybe. I'm sure everything else is good. All right, so we need a user serializer. We'll get to that. Well, yeah, let's kind of run through our application, get that set up, and then we'll work with our models. So what do we need to do for authentication? So there's a few things we need to do. Again, it's hard to memorize all this, especially if you're not doing it often. But first thing, we set up my JWT response handler. Again, this we name whatever you want it to. Whatever you name it in your settings file over here where we were before, you need to have a JW auth section. Inside of that, you need to link it to your handler. So that's what we did here. Okay, so that should be done. We're gonna need to add a serializer. So let's try to take care of that. Serializers. All right, so before we need to create a serializer, let's just go from the ground up. So we need to create models. So I'm gonna go to my to-do list app and let's create some models. So here, again, our main project is creating a to-do list, and that's gonna have probably 2 models at least. So one model I'm thinking of is gonna be a task list. It's going to inherit from models.model. What should we put into our task list item here? Anyone have suggestions?
It would have, if you're for your second class, it would have, you need a foreign key at least towards the end for lists.
Yep. So we're going to have another model called task, I guess, models.model. As Alex said, we need a foreign key here. So to do that, we'll say, let's say list equals models.foreign key. And then we want to refer to what we're pointing to. So in this case, we're going to have one parent or linked task list. Always good to have a related name. Again, this is optional, but I generally always put it. So let's say tasks will be the related name. So when you're creating a related name, I always just kind of look at what model we're in. So currently we're in the task model. So this related name should be named that in a plural form, because essentially what this is doing is on our task list, we're going to have a kind of a new field called tasks that we can reference. So we get all the tasks associated with one task list. So that's a related name. If you don't provide a related name, Django will create a related name for you. I think the look of that is it's going to be named task_set. Right, and then for foreign keys, we do need to specify on delete methods. We're going to do models.cascade. That's usually what I always do. So again, this just says if we delete the mass.
Are we going to have more than one task list?
Yeah, you could have multiple task lists. Like I might have a weekend to-do list, and then I might have like a end of summer to-do list, and you could have multiple task lists in this design. Yep. So okay, so we're gonna have a task list, lists, and let's say a task is gonna have a name. So we'll do models.char field, max length. Let's just say be up to 64 characters, maybe 128 in case we need to describe it. I think looking at our requirements, so let's make sure we hit up all the requirements. I think they mentioned due date, and then also the ability to complete a task or mark a task completed. So we'll probably need a completed Boolean field and a due date, which would be a date field or a date time field. So let's do completed equals models.Boolean field. Let's actually have a default. So by default, a task will be marked as not completed. We also need a due date. So a due date field. Let's see what options we have. I think we have a date field. Yep. And I don't think we need to pass anything in there. All right, so we have a few fields for our task. So we have name, completed, due date, and then the list it's part of. For our list, I can't think of too many fields. Maybe a name, obviously, for the master list. So like again, if it's my weekend to-do list, I'll name my task list appropriately. So models chart field. Let's go with 128. Can you want to think of anything else we might need in our task list models? I'm not sure.
You'll need some way to associate it with the user. Is that going to go in the database or somewhere else?
Yep, good catch there, Sean. So yeah, a user should be the owner of a task list. So it's not going to be necessarily viewable by everyone. So let's get a foreign key in here. So do models foreign key user related name. Let's go with task lists, and on deletes do our usual models casting. So what's going on here is that we are taking advantage of the built-in user model, but we do need to import it. So let's do that right now. Django dot, I think it's contrib dot auth dot models, kind of a long chain there, import user. All right, so again, Django already provides us a user model. So in most cases, it's kind of just convenient just to use that user model because the authentication will kind of go off of that. You do have the option of providing your own user model that is a little more involved. But again, this user model has default fields like email, username, password, and a few other things. Let's say you need to add on to that user model. Like, let's say you want favorite color as part of your user model. There are a few ways you can actually create your own user model or extend the base user model and add data to it. In this case, I don't think we need extra data, but in case we get to that, we could maybe cross that bridge if needed. All right, so we have task lists and tasks as our foreign keys. Okay, I think that's all I want right now, unless anyone can think of anything else we definitely need. Yeah, for now, I think I'm going to proceed with these models. While I'm at it, let's not forget our string methods, just for better presentation. So these don't have to be anything too complex. I'll just do return the name of the task list, and maybe the owner of it. So we'll do self.user.username. All right, and same thing for our task model. Let's add a string method. Let's just give the name. Okay, so those are our models. All right, so we create our models. How do we actually get to our database? Again, hopefully we've done this enough times. Let's go with Mark Stanley. How do I get this good stuff into my database? My database actually reflects what I want to use.
You can use the admin panel to put the info in.
Yep, yeah, so that'll seed my database. But before I do that, I need to get my database structures in place. So how do I get my database tables kind of created?
You'll need to make migrations and migrate.
Yep, you got it. Two parts process. So first is Python manage make migrations. This is wrapping a little too much. Make migrations. If there's any errors, this would catch it, but it looks like there's no errors. So that's good. Then we want to migrate. So Python manage migrate. All right, there we go. So push all the Django stuff and the stuff that we added. While I'm at it, I'm going to create a super user. So I do want to use that admin panel that Mark mentioned. So let's create super user here. All right, admin. Don't care about a bad password right now. All right, so we created a super user. We pushed our models to the database. Our database should have those tables. Another thing I want to do is register my models so I can actually interact with them from my admin panel. So we'll do that here. Let's import our models. So to do app models, import star, and then we need to register them. So admin.site register. We had our task list model, and likewise we had our task model. Okay, so at this point, I think I could fire up my, actually I can't because I probably will have an error in my utils here. So let me comment this out for now. All right, I just want to get my server running and see if it actually will run for me. So Python manage py run server. Let's see if we get any errors here. Port array in use. Well, that makes sense because I think I have another project running. All right, so sorry about that. Let's see if I can get that running now. If not, we can always use a different port. But no, there we go. All right, so our backend server is running. So let's try to work with that for now. I do need a Chrome window. Okay, so let's go to our main page. All right, so nothing here because we've not set up any URLs. So you should see something like this if you've never bothered to create your URLs, which we need to do. Okay, let's, guess we should be able to get to our admin panel though. Admin. Okay, so notice we have task lists and tasks, so we could actually, manually create some data if we want to seed our database that way. So let's actually do that. Let's create a task list. Let's say weekend tasks. User. We don't have a user right now. I don't want to tie it to the admin, so let's create a user from myself. Say Encore. Password be something. Save. All right, fine. Complex password. All right, cool. So create a user named Encore. If I go to my task list, let's say weekend tasks, we'll add it to my lists. Save that. Okay, so now we have one task list. Let's add some tasks to it. What am I doing this weekend? Probably gonna buy some donuts. Due dates. Not sure if there's an actual due date I care about. But let's say we want to do that by Saturday. Save that. All right, so that's one task. Let's add another task. What do I want to do? Let's say
Laundry, maybe.
yes, always. I actually had to do laundry, so it's a good call there. Do laundry. Due date. Let's say finish by the end of the weekend. Again, I probably could have made this like a date time, like a date and time field if I had, that granularity. But in this case, I picked date field since I'm only going to do it by day. All right, so we have two tasks. I'm not going to bother with too much data right now. So given that, we have some data in the database, but we need to add some URLs. So currently we have nothing here. Let's get to our other parts of our app. So step one, we created our models. Step two, I want to create serializers. So to do that, I'm going to create a serializers file, not in that project. VS Code. All right, so I want to create a new file called serializers.py. In that, I'm going to actually use the Django REST framework. If you can remember from Friday, it's much quicker to use this. I'm kind of going to accept their default behavior. I'm kind of fine with it. So to do that, I'm going to from Django, sorry, from REST framework, imports serializers, import model serializer. Okay, so we also need our models here. So from to do list app models, import everything. All right, let's create our serializers quickly. So we're going to have class task list serializer. That's going to inherit from model serializer. And then we just need to specify a few fields here. So I think it's class meta. And within that, we need two items. We need the model. In this case, the model for this will be task list, and then fields. One thing about serializer, the model serializer, if you do not specify the fields, by default, it'll take all of your fields that you list in your model. So actually, if we want to see that, let's actually just not specify fields right now and just specify the model. I'll do the same thing for my task. And I totally forgot I am not recording this. Oh, I am recording this. I always feel like I always forget. Okay, and then we have task serializer. Okay, there we go. That's all we need to do for our serializers. It's pretty quick. Now that we have our serializers, let's go to our views. So I'm going to use view sets. If you remember, view sets kind of have baked in functionality, so we don't have to create views one by one. The Django REST framework will take care of it. So I do from REST framework view sets, import, I think it's view sets. I think that's the call. Let me double check because I'm not 100% sure. So DRF view sets. All right, so it looks like view sets and then view set. All right, no, I think I'm good. All right, so we're going to create a couple of view sets to kind of parallel our models. So one will be class task list view set. That's going to inherit from that view set item. This again needs two items that we need to specify. One is your query set. This is how it gets the data that's going to CRUD for us. So we're going to specify that's going to come from our models. So from to-do list app dot models, let's import everything. All right, so query set is going to be task list dot objects dot all. Again, so you're just kind of telling this view set what data you're going to be working with here, and then the serializer that handles the serialization. So serializer class, that's going to be so I can import that also. So from serializers, the serializers we just created, we're going to import those and then specify those appropriately. So if I do a quick copy and paste, should get the other task list there. So task, task, and task. All right. So
quick question, Oker.
Yep.
When you're doing your query sets, is there a way to limit those to just the user that's logged in? Because if you get a large database, that's going to give you all of the task lists right now, and then somewhere else you're going to filter that through to just display for the current.
You can, so I'm pretty sure you can specify get and then some filtering here. But the thing you want to keep in mind is that this is a server, it's a central server. You could have multiple front-end apps running with multiple users logged in. So what you're specifying here should be all of the data so that you can filter it later. It's not a one-to-one relationship between front-end and your back-end server, right? So like Sean, you could be using this to-do list app, I could be using it. The server at this point shouldn't filter on that user. That should be done at some other point. So we're just saying this task list view set works off of the task list objects. And then we could, again, filter it at some other point. Right, good question though. So yeah, we are gonna need to filter it, kind of looking ahead. When I log in with my user, I should only see the task list that I created. I shouldn't be able to see, Sean's task list or anyone else's task list. Okay, so we created our view sets. So we did models, we did serializers, we did view sets. Next, I'm gonna go to create my URLs. So go back to my project. Here I need to include my app URLs. So we'll do include, add a new path. What do I want to call this? I'm actually just going to call this API. I don't know if that's too generic, but hopefully we can live with it. Include, and then the URL. So to list app.urls. All right, so we're just going to point to a new URLs location. That's going to be something we need to create. So we'll create it right now. Go back to our app folder, create urls.py. And then I want to copy basically what I had before. Don't need admin here. All right, so this is where we can use view sets. All right, again, DRF kind of makes it very easy. First thing I want to do is import some stuff. So from REST framework .routers, import default router. There's also something called simple router, which can get the job done. I'm not sure what default router provides. Aside from what simple router provides, I think there's additional functionality, but I'm not familiar with it. Router equals, let's actually use simple router.
I think the documentation said it provides some extra like URL functionality compared to simple router, but I don't remember specifically what it was.
Yeah, for now I'm going to go with simple router. If we actually need more functionality, we can always switch that later. So router.register. And let's see, we want task lists as our base name, or as our URL base. We need to provide the view sets that work with these URLs. So I'm going to do from my views import those view sets. All right, so we had task list view set. Again, this is gonna kind of handle all the CRUD for us. We're not gonna have to manually do it. That's why I chose to use DRF. And then base name, task list. All right, that's for our task list. We need to do it for our task objects. So we'll call that tasks. Okay, so these are going to register those view sets with our router. And to actually get those URLs, we could add it in a couple ways. So I think one way is to include. And to include this, I think we need to do, sorry, we need a path, include, and then router.urls. I think it should work this way. I know we've done it a different way before, but I want to see if this will work. This will allow us, it gives us the option to add other paths that are outside of our view sets, which I might want to do later. So let's see if that works. Okay, so that takes care of our serializers, our view sets, our URLs. Let's see if we can actually get some data now. So we already see it in our database. It looks like our server has complained about something. Let's kill it and restart it. Okay, server looks to be good. Let's refresh here. All right, cool. So we got our familiar error page. This is a good sign, not a bad sign. Let's go to /API. All right, we got nothing there. But so what we're doing here is we're going to navigate to task list. That's the base name we gave it. Again, we can name this whatever we wanted to, but we called it task list because that was appropriate. Let's go to API/task lists. And we did not get anything. What am I missing here?
Try going to API/ and it might give you some pointers to deeper.
Yeah, I think that didn't tell me. So let me try this a different way. So the usual way we do this is URL patterns equals router.urls. I'm not sure if I screw that up somehow. Refresh. Okay, let's figure this out. All right, so API is my base path. I'm going to to-do lists _ apps.urls. There, I created URLs here, and I did this. So what could I be missing here? URLs.
Could it be symbol router instead of default router?
We could try that. I think simple router should work.
Yeah, like I'm just looking at what I got working yesterday. Taking some guesses.
Oh, I think you need an R in front of your task list and task on your router.register.
So that just makes them raw strings. I don't think that should be it, but again, worth a try. No, it doesn't hurt to try. All right, so we got our URLs now. That seems better. Let's go back here. All right, so we got to API roots. That's not quite where I was hoping to get to. Let's see. API roots. Should be able to get task lists. Let's try some tasks. All right, so let's actually print out URL patterns to see what I'm actually dealing with here. So get API-roots. Let's see, router.urls. Yeah, I'm not sure what I'm missing here. So it's giving us something here, but I don't want API roots. Let's see. Teslas. Task lists.
Try closing slash.
Naming here
Hey.
since
Hey, Ankur,
Yep.
in your views, File, I had a little bit different syntax for importing the view set. It was from rest-framework.viewset. So, okay, you're just importing it under a different name as
Yeah.
viewset.
I assume you did
Okay.
just the REST framework import
Yeah,
resets.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing.
Do you need, oh, never mind.
I like the suggestions. All right, maybe documentation will help us out here. So let's go with DRF URLs, view sets and routers. All right, so we have our view set. We have that. How do we get URLs? So using routers. All right, so registering it like that. We have a view set imported. Yeah, so I was doing this before. Let's see. I shouldn't change it. Looks pretty much like what I'm doing. Snippets.views. Don't think that's the issue. All right, let's stare at this for a little bit. Hopefully we could figure it out here. Maybe call this. That should make a difference. Save that. Router.register. Yeah, I'm kind of stumped here. I think probably a good time to take a break. So I don't want to waste too much time debugging in front of you guys. So let's take a 7-minute break while I try to figure this out. And then we'll get back to it. So let's get back at 11 o'clock sharp, and I should have this figured out by then.
Thank
Sorry
you.
for the delay. Yep. All right, so Reno had the answer for us. My issue was I was using viewset instead of model viewset. So model viewset is the one you want to use. So apologies for that error there, but we're back on track. So now that we are using model viewset, I didn't change anything here. We're still using simple router. I guess I did change the naming here, but that shouldn't matter. Otherwise, now we should have our URL patterns. So if we actually go back to our server, notice that we actually have these routes defined. I guess I changed my base XYZ when I was testing something. Let's change that back. API. All right, cool. So if we refresh, we should have our paths now. So we have API. Let's go there. And then we have our routes that we're looking for. So again, just reiterate, model view set is what you want to use, not just the plain view set. All right, so let's go to task list and see if we can actually see some data. All right, there we go. This looks familiar to me. I created a weekend task list. Looks like my user ID is 2. ID for that task list is 1. That looks cool. Let's go to tasks and see what tasks exist. All right, buy some donuts, do laundry. Those look familiar again. We have due dates. We have the list that belongs to, so we only have one list right now. So it looks like we're getting data that looks to be correct. Let's kind of figure out our authentication, and then we can kind of go to our front end. So for our authentication, we need to add maybe a new URL. Let's do urls.py. Here, I want to add some more URLs. All right, so here we're going to add a login. So I'm going to just simply call it login. And then we need to import something from REST framework, which I forget. So I'm going to go back to the curriculum page and look for what we need to import. Where are you? All right, that's what we need. So we need to obtain JWT token from REST framework. Let's do a quick copy paste. I don't mistype anything. All right, so we have this obtain JWT token. We need to include that in some path. So the path we'll give it would be /login. And I think we just pass obtain JWT token. But again, we have a new app here. So if you remember, we create 2 separate apps. One is to-do list app, which has our main logic. our auth has the logic for logging in. So we need to actually point to that. So for my URLs, I'll create a base. Let's actually call this login. And off here. Comma. So back in this, I'm just going to leave this blank. So again, if we go to slash login slash, it should get us to this obtain JWT token. And that should take care of that. We need to create our user serializer. So let's create a new serializer here. Serializers. This is going to be a manual serializer. So to that, I'm going to, what am I going to do? I guess I could just still use REST framework. So import from REST framework, import model serializer. And I'm gonna definitely copy some stuff from the curriculum page because I don't want to try to Google it myself and I don't remember it. So serializer, we have model serializer. Okay, what do we want to do here? We want to tie it to the user model. So class meta model will be user. Before I forget, I think I misspoke earlier. So for serializers, I think you actually do need to specify the fields. I was reading online in the previous version of Django, you could leave fields off and it'll default to all, but it looks like on newer versions of Django, you actually need to manually specify the fields. So apologies if I misled anyone there, but you do want to add the fields to your serializers manually. It's not going to automatically default to it. All right, back to my other serializer that I was creating. So that's an auth serializers. All right, so user serializer is going to use our user model, which we need to import. So it's going to be from django.contrib.auth.models. Import user. Okay, so model is going to be that. Fields can be all. Or do we want to actually limit our fields? So let's do ID as one of our fields that we pass back, username, and the password. But this password is not something we want to send back to the user. We only want to take that in. So password is going to be a read-only field, or a write-only field, I guess. Serializer. Sorry, let's take this off. I think this is the same field as model fields, but I'm gonna make this write only. So again, we're not gonna allow sending back the data. It's only gonna be taken in. So when a user, when we're creating a new user, we're gonna take in the password and do something with it. So here, again, I'm gonna do some copy and paste if you guys don't mind. We're gonna have a method called create. This is a pre-reserved function. We're overriding the base model serializer. So whenever we're creating a new user, this method is gonna get called. All right, the reason we need to do this is because of the password. If you remember, we need to call set password on whatever we're getting in. So when I'm signing up as a user, I'm gonna have like a password of 1234, hopefully a little more secure. That clear text password needs to be hashed, and that hashing is done by set password. So this is where it's actually gonna be kind of captured, where we get this validated data is going to be like your user object. We're actually going to take the password off, save, get the instance, and then set the password before we save it. So again, set password will take care of the hashing for us because we don't want to store clear text passwords. And then the password field is going to be write only. So again, when we create a user, we're going to supply a password, but when we write back a user or pass back a user to our front end, the password should not be there. Right, looks like I mistyped user up here. Okay, so that's our user serializer. This again is going to be used with our token handler. So that was in utils. If you remember this user serializer that I kind of captured out or commented out, let's add that back in. So we have user serializer that's going to be provided with alongside the token that's created. Okay, let's actually see if this works. Again, I might have missed some steps, so I'm not going to guarantee it works, but I think I have the pieces in terms of my API provides data, and I should be able to get, see what happens if I actually go to login. I'm not sure what's going to happen. Login. Get not allowed. That's not cool. Oh, I guess when we post, we should create. So let's try a post. All right, let's create a new user. So let's say, Jack, you're on my screen, so I'm gonna pick on you if you don't mind. Jack's password would be super secret password of something. I'm able to log in with, oh, so that's a login. So okay, maybe this is not creating a user. Let's use my existing user. What was my password? Is that it? I forget what my password was. All right, there we go. So remember my password. Now we get our token back. So if I were logging in, I'm going to send a post request to this on the back end, and this is what I should receive back. So token and then the user information. Notice that my password is not in here because we made that a write-only field. So when we're getting back the data, the password is going to be omitted because we don't want to kind of expose that in the front end. Okay, so that looks to be working correctly. I think I'm ready to move on to my front end. Again, we might need to add some changes in our back end. I'm not saying we're 100% done with it, but I think we have enough to go off of where we can get to our front end. So can I minimize my back end project here? I want to focus on my front end. All right, so we have our React project that we started. Let's go to our app.js. So that's usually what we modified first. Gonna clear out the default React items. All right, let's add in a simple H1. And let's fire up our server. So npm start should get our React server going. Always run into errors when I don't want to. All right, so it looks like I'm creating a nested directory. I think that's what I started before. So I need to cd into to-do list. Not my ideal design, but let's do that. All right, so again, I had a nested folder. I think I forgot my period before when I was doing create React app. I think I added that period to the folder name instead of that. Looks like my ports in use, of course. All right, let's see if I could do it again. Nope. It's always good to have only one project running. All right, so my React server is coming up. My backend server is still running and my other terminal. Okay, let's see if we get to our front ends. All right, hello world. Looks like our front end server is running, up running. But now, obviously, the hard part is actually creating a UI where we could actually log in and then also deal with task lists. So for now, I'm not going to worry about the logging in. I just want to see if we get our task list data up to the screen, and then we could protect ourselves with the logging in once we get to that point. So let's create some pages. I'm thinking we probably want a home page. So create a home page component. What else do I want? Probably need a task detail page. So I'll call it task page.js. And then we probably want a task list page also. Task list page. Again, just kind of trying to mirror the data that we have in our backend. All right, so those are the 3 pages I'm thinking of right now. Maybe we'll need a login page later, but right now, not going to do that. So for our React app, we're going to want to use React Router DOM, which I don't think I installed. Yep, don't see it in my package.json, so we could take care of that here. Let's do npm install React-router DOM. Okay, so that'll be added to our package.json and should be installed to our node modules. So yep, React Router DOM got added. Good to see that. Now that we have that, let's kick our server back up. And in our app, we should be able to import browser router from React Router DOM. All right, and then we also have a bunch of pages. So let's import those. Import homepage.
You also have to import a route.
Yep, I guess I'll be reading route. Thank you. From pages. Homepage. What we had task list page and task page. Let's quickly add those. All right, so these components obviously you haven't created them yet, but I will promise. All right, so let's use our router. So we're gonna have browser router. Instead of that, I'll add a div, not a div, div. Okay, and now we can add some routes. So one route will be for our homepage. Let's just make that slash, and that should be rendering our homepage. Same thing for our task list page and tasks. So we're going to have task lists, and then ID. So task list ID. And similar path for our task. So let's go task list, task, and then ID. We'll go to our task page.
For your import statement task list page, your route needs list.
Thank you. All right, so let's actually go to our components and quickly create some dummy components. So I'm just going to do this quickly. React class components. We'll have homepage. We'll have task list page and a task page. What is this? Task page. All right, let's give those names. So this will be H1 test page. Again, just going to kind of test this out without real data. But I know that, again, if we look at our routes, so go back to my app.js, I've provided some IDs. So these IDs can be captured through the route props that are automatically passed to our pages. So we should be able to use task list ID and task ID in the appropriate components. So let's see if we could actually see that in action. So task list page, let's add in this dot props dot match dot params dot task ID, and let's actually see what that is. And similarly, we can do that for task lists. All right, so setting up our general navigation scheme here. Task list page with the task list ID. Okay, let's actually see if we can hit these pages and make sure we see what we expect. So if I go to the home page, that clearly died. Home page, where are you? App.js, right, homepage, don't have anything in here. So H1, homepage. All right, there we go. So we're on our homepage. Let's go to /task-lists. So that's what I called it. And we need an ID, so let's put 1. All right, there we go. So notice we get capture the ID from the URL. If I go to task list 2, that should show 2. So now this should let us, again, given the ID, we should be able to use that ID to make a call to the backend requesting that particular task list. So if we go to, if we have ID 2, we'll pass that ID to our backend saying, hey, we want task list with ID 2 here. We should get the data back. Likewise for tasks, that's nested here. So tasks, let's put task 1. That's filled. Looks like task singular. Let's make that plural here. Okay, so there we go. Task page 1, go to ID 2. Yep. Okay, so that looks like it's working. Again, just kind of review what we did. We are using browser router and providing some paths. These paths are totally up to what you want to have for your front end, right? They don't really correspond to the back end in any particular direct manner. But in this case, my homepage is just at the base URL. Then I add task list with a task ID. That should go to my task list page. And then for me, I chose to have my tasks kind of nested on a task list. Again, you don't have to create that nesting, but that's what I chose. But those are the paths that I created. All right, so now again, the harder part is actually getting data to display. So I'm going to start with I'm not sure what my homepage is going to show right now, so I'm just going to go with my task list page. And let's actually get some data from our backend. So if you remember, kind of hopping back to our backend, we should be able to go to API/task-lists and make a GET request to a particular task list. So we'll do it to a task list 1. We should get this data back, right? So our path is going to be localhost 8000/API. API is the base prefix I gave it, so don't be confused by any automatic naming there. So I called it API-task list, and then the ID should give us back what we want. So I'm actually just going to copy this, and let's create a new folder in our front end called API. I want a folder, API. And in that, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it, what do I want to call it? Let's call it to do API. .js. We are working with JavaScript files here, after all. All right, so here I'm going to write, this is where my fetch requests are going to be. So remember fetch, our good old friend. We need to, let's create a base URL, so const base URL. It's going to be localhost/API. All right, and then we want some fetch calls. So let's create const get task list by ID. Okay, here we're going to take in an ID, as you might have guessed, task list ID, and then we should return something. So here, this is where we use fetch. I'm going to make this an async await because it's my favorite or preferred way of going about it. So I should do this async. That arrow function. Okay, so here I need to do some requests. So let requests equal, we're going to use our fetch. And then fetch is going to have some URL. It's going to be base URL plus some other stuff. Any questions here? I feel like I'm kind of coding in a silo here, but any questions that are prepped up, please ask.
Do you need an await in front of your fetch?
I do. Good catch there. So task list and then the ID. So the ID is passing to us, task list ID. I think it's very hard today. All right, so base URL, task list, because again, we're going to API /task list and then the ID with a trailing slash. I think that might be important. Okay, fetch, we do need an await. So Jack, I'm glad you kind of mentioned that. If we don't have this await, fetch is going to return a promise. So we're not going to get that request object. It's going to be a promise that resolves to a request. So this await is going to say, wait for that promise to resolve and actually get back that request object. So yep, all right, and then we're going to want data out of it. So let's call that data, another await, and request.json. All right, so we're going to get JSON data out of it, and this returns another promise. Therefore, we're going to wait for that to resolve, and the data we get back should be, ideally, it should look like this if we make that, if everything is wired correctly. So then we can return data if everything is kosher, but always good to wrap this in a try catch. Again, not sure what could fail, but you never want to be.
That's Python.
Thank you. Catch multiple coding languages there. Yep. All right. So try catch. Not sure where we'll catch some error. If we catch an error, we'll just return null, and let's console log this error. All right. So I'm not expecting any errors, but you never know, right? So console log error, that error. All right. In that case, we'll return null. So we should, again, we're returning either some data or null objects. So whoever's calling this function should always check, hey, what am I getting back? You don't want to assume, this error is not going to protect you from, returning bad data or returning nothing. So, okay, data or null, get task list ID. That's what I care about. We need to export something. So let's create a const my export, and we'll export get task list by ID. Okay, so we created one function in our API call. We'll probably create more, but I just want to get something running. So let's go back to our task list page. Where were you? There you are. All right, so this is where we actually want to use that API. So obviously we should import it to do API from /API, it's like //
Yeah,
API.
gotta go up higher.
Yep. To list. All right. So again, taking advantage of our lifecycle methods, if you kind of remember, we need to do this in component did mount. You usually don't want to do it in a constructor. So if we add lifecycle, let's do component did mount. And that's going to call our function. I usually like to create a separate function for this. Again, not required. Helper. So let's do async get task list. And we're going to have some ID that we're going to capture from the props. So this is the ID we're getting. Let's do render list later. All right, so get task list. This is where we do our fetch call. So if I do a try catch, just in case, what do you want to do here? We want to call to do API, get task list by ID, and we need an ID. So what is the task list ID? Well, we definitely have access to that. That's coming from, again, these are router props. These are coming from the router object that we are using. That's automatically going to pass this to us. That's going to have task list ID, because that is the name we gave that parameter here. Okay, so on our task list page, we should be able to grab the ID and then pass that into our call. This should return us a JSON object if everything worked correctly. So let's say let task list data equal that. But as I mentioned, if we got some error, that could be null. So it's always good to kind of check with an if statement. You can just do task list. Oh, we need to do wait here. Task list data is something that's not null. Let's do something with it. So in this case, I think I want a state value. So we'll create a state value and call that task list. Okay, make that
An array?
It's not going to be an array. I'm going to get a single task list back, so I'm just going to make it null, and we'll deal with the null side of it. So task list data, if we get that, we could do this dot set state. Now that we have data, we want to update our state value. So in this case, task list, and then our new data. So task list data. Okay, this is going to be an object that's going to have these fields in it. It should have ID, a name of the task list, and the user that owns it. I probably could add tasks here. That's something I'll get to in a moment. But okay, so catch, I don't know what I want to catch here. All right, so assuming this state gets called, it's going to update our state value, which should trigger a re-render. I created this method. Let's call this here get task list. I created a method called render task list, which will handle showing the details for me. So implement that here, task list. This is going to use my state value. So my state value is this dot state dot task list. But if that is null, then I probably don't want to render anything at this point. Let's return all right, but in the common case, I guess we could use curly braces. We don't have to, but we should. In the common case, let's render the details of this task list. So return the div that has, it's an H1. This will be this dot curly braces, this dot state dot task list dot name. What else we had? We had the name. So in this case, showing ID to the user doesn't make sense. Currently, I have ID of the task list and also have a user. This user probably should be a name instead of an ID. So that's something we probably want to change. But right now we show user. I don't want to show the ID because the ID can be found in the URL. So let's see, under task list. I forgot a this, didn't I? Always forgetting that this. Okay, let's give that a run. Any questions on what we kind of did here? Maybe hopefully not too quickly, but again, just doing the pieces where we are calling our API up here. I did this in an async await. So the API, this, I just want to reiterate this. It's not super obvious. Anytime you create an async function, the return value always is going to be a promise, even if you don't create a promise yourself. So in this async function, I'm not returning anything, but my get task list by ID, if we look at that, notice I'm returning data, which is going to be my JSON object. But since this is an async function, that's going to automatically be wrapped by a promise. Again, it's easy to kind of miss that and say, okay, I'm getting my JSON data back directly here. No, since this is an async function, this will be wrapped in a promise. Just kind of understand that. So because that's wrapped in a promise, we need to await that function to actually get that data back. All right, let's give this a run and see how we are doing. So React front end, let's go to our task list number 1. Okay, no task list found. That is not cool. Let's see what our console shows. Okay, 404 not found. Let's make sure our API call is correct. So localhost 8000 API task list ID. So let's do a console log of.
Is that supposed to be a wait fetch or another async fetch?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, Don?
Is that supposed to be a wait fetch or another async fetch?
Async is only used for creating function definitions. You always use await within those functions. So you do not want to use async as your keyword here. But good question there. Let's see what URL we're actually navigating to and if we actually get data back from that. So URL, I'll just print it out, so it'll let me. Okay, let's see what we're dealing with here. All right, URL is localhost 8000. Looks like I have an extra slash. That is no good. All right, let's see if that cleans it up. Unauthorized. So it looks like we do need to log in.
If you want to skip this, the way that I found work that made this part work without auth is you just comment out all that JWT token stuff that you have in your Python setting.
Gotcha. So, yep, kind of want to avoid authorization right now. So let's go to
settings for the main app.
Gotcha. This stuff, right?
Also, the JWT, there's like the five or six lines, the RAS framework. This part as well is where that comes from.
Okay. Thanks, Jack, for that assistance. Back. All right. Go to 1. Okay, there we go. So we got weekend tasks, and the user is user ID 2. Obviously, we want to show an actual user there, so let's clean that up. In our backend, if I go back to my serializers, where's that?
That'd be in the auth side, right? Because that's where you're serializing the users.
Yep, so task list here, by default, that field is going to be an ID. So let's actually manually do this. We're going to return ID for the task list, the name of the task list, and then user. The user, I don't want that to be an ID. So this is where we modify the user to be something else. So user can be serializers, string related field. Again, a lot of this comes down to reading documentation, which isn't fun, but we'll get you through it. So string related field is, I think, what I want to use here. So we do string related fields. That should let me do it. So what this is going to look for is the done string method on the user. Let's see if that changes my requests. Let's see. We go to task lists /1. Oh, forgot my API. Okay, notice that my name is now shown here instead of just my ID. And that's, again, more relevant to your front end. So there's a couple ways you can handle this. Your serializer right here can pass back the name, or I guess the longer way is that you could pass back the ID to your front end, and then your front end can request the details for that user that's looking for. In this case, I think this is a little easier. So we take that, refresh this. All right, notice we get my name here. So it looks a little more presentable. Thank you again, Jack, for that quick hack for avoiding the authentication stuff. But I do want to use that authentication stuff soon.
I hate to say the same problem, but I was like, I'm not ready to mess around with that just yet. I want to like get stuff working, then we'll deal with authentication. And I figured out how to like turn that shit off.
Yep, definitely another layer on top for authentication. Okay, so that looks like it's working. Let's implement our task page quickly. It's going to look very similar to our task list page. So similar in that I'm going to copy a lot of it and then modify it. So I had a type less. Anything to type less is usually better. So get task list. We'll have a task list ID. Just need to comment that. We're going to have a method called get task by ID. Promise I'll create it. Task data. All right, pretty straightforward there. Task. Make sure I hit all those points. We need our state method, our state object. Task this time. That will be null by default. Okay, cool. I think that should take care of most of it. Let's add some. Let's add a method to handle this. So render task. Any questions out there? I know we're coding a little quickly, but there's a lot to get done here. But please ask if you have any questions. Not trying to purposely rush us. All right, so render task and look again very similar to this. So copy and paste. So my tabbing is not behaving. Okay, render task is what I want to call it. If the task is null, then we'll say no task found. Otherwise, we want to show the task name. What else we want to show? Probably the due date. What else do we have on there? We had completed, which is a Boolean. I go one more field, but we have the task list, the master or the parent task list. Completed. All right, so that's Boolean. So we're doing a ternary. Let's see if this works. All right, so H3s. I need a component did mount. So this is, again, this is component did mount is the actual item that triggers your request, because component did mount automatically gets called by React. So if you leave that out, that won't automatically happen for you. All right, render, let's slide in. All right, so get task. And of course, I forgot my this down here. Okay, so again, did a lot of copy and pasting because it's essentially the same logic. We're going to call some API, in this case, get task by ID. So let's create that call up here. And usually I found myself when I'm doing this, I actually just want to create a generic, let's call it a try catch fetch. I like the name of that. This will take in a URL and I need to console log it. All right, so this is super generic. So that I'm going to just create a try catch fetch, and then I could use that for my other methods. So here I'll do try catch fetch URL, and my URL was what it was before. All right, so again, the principle, don't repeat yourself. The dry principle, definitely do that here. All right, so we want to return await that. All right, that looks like something I can copy and paste now for this correctly. All right, for my task by ID, get rid of task list, get rid of task list. All right, I think that should take care of it. So again, by creating the central function, my typing is much shorter. I think that's the right ID or the URL I need to go to, get task by ID. And okay, let's see if that works. Failed to compile to do API not, because we didn't import it. So import to do API from API and to do API. Any questions out there? Please ask. All right, let's see if we actually get our data back. So if I go to our task page, so that's the route for that is tasks and there. All right, cool. That looks correct. Buy some donuts. Definitely not done because my stomach is not feeling full right now, and the due date is by Saturday. Okay, so it looks like that looks wired up correctly. Let's add some links. So basically, we probably want to link to tasks from our task page. Currently, if you go back to our backend, I know we're hopping back and forth. Our task list does not return a list of tasks, which we probably want to do here. So we need to update our serializer so we return the data we care about. So we go back to our backend. Again, I'm not trying to hop too often, but all right. So here, our task list serializer, again, returning only these three things. But we do have a tasks field. Where does this come from? Well, good question. If you were mentally asking it, that's coming from the related names here. So we have something called tasks. That should be part of our serializers here. So let's see if that actually works if I'm making that up. All right, there we go. So these are IDs for the task. Well, what if I wanted names? Well, to me, similar. Should be similar, hopefully. If we do tasks equal string related field. For this case, this is many items. So you need to specify a field called many equals true. Again, this isn't just coming out of nowhere. It's coming from reading documentation. Just know that if you have a foreign key relationship, you want to specify many equals true. Hopefully, if I did this correctly, this should update it. All right, cool. So we got buy some donuts and do laundry. Again, the reason I want to show text is because that's what I'm going to show on the front end. The IDs don't matter as much, but I do need my IDs at some point. So
would like a depth equal to 1 inside of your fields also solve this?
Good question. So this depth thing, again, from documentation, I am curious if it will solve it for me, but I am familiar that it exists. Yeah, check. Thank you again. Yeah, so depth equals 1 will actually automatically go to that serializer. So my task serializer will be used in that case, and it shows all the information I want. Mostly I want the ID and name. I actually don't want all these items. So I could prune that out, but I don't think it necessarily hurts me if I include it. So I'll leave that as is. All right, so the main two things I want, again, are the name and ID. So now if I go back to my front end, task list page. All right, so previously, all we were showing was the name of the task list and the user that owned it. Let's actually add all the tasks that are associated with it. And we can do that via, let's do a new function, render tasks. And we'll need to create that function. So render tasks.
Hey, Ankur, it auto completed your function call. There's something wrong.
Oh, thank you. Yep. So this dot render tasks is what I want. This will return, I'm thinking, an unordered list, probably. So let's return an unordered list. Maybe it could be an ordered list. I'm not sure. I like unordered list better, so with that. Okay, and then we want to create some list items. So how do we do that? Well, we could do that up here. Do let, say, task elements. All right, we're going to make use of our map array function. Hopefully everyone by now understands how to use it. If not, I highly recommend getting more practice with it because it's super useful. So if we do this dot state dot task list dot tasks dot map, we should be able to map over all the tasks that we have. So this should be an anonymous function. Okay, so for each task, we want to create a list elements. So do list elements and probably
With the key of your index.
Yep. I guess you're kind of preventing me from getting warnings, so I appreciate it. Let's do backtick. The key will be, let's call it task with an ID. Okay, so the key for this list element will be that I want to use a link tag. Again, we talked about the link versus the A tag. Link will work well with your router, or the A tag will kind of reset your application. I don't want it from there. I want it from React Router down. So import link from React Router down. All right, so again, link essentially behaves like an anchor tag or an A tag, but works with your browser, router. So in this case, I want a link, and then I just want to link to the task.name. So that'll be the title. Where do I want to link to? It's a good question. I want to link to, what's my path? So my path is going to be, if I remember correctly, task dash list. Then you need the task list ID. So task this dot state dot task list dot ID. Or sorry, ID. Okay, slash task. Maybe my URL should be a little shorter, but we can still make this work. $sign task.id. All right, so this is the URL I've set up. If you remember looking at our router, looks like I don't have that ID in here. So let's slide that in there for good measure. All right, so task list ID with tasks, and then a task ID should get us to the task page. So that's what I'm looking to. Task list. Make sure I match correctly. Task list plural. Then the ID of the task list, then tasks plural, and then the ID. All right, let's see if this works. So we're creating task elements. We need to return those elements here. It doesn't like my return statement because I did not close my map.
You just need one last flat parents outside your curly brace at the bottom.
All right, so that closes my map function. Oops, that should be like that. Okay, I think that looks good. Let's test it out. Front end. Let's go back to our task list. Okay, so we got weekend tasks. We got nothing listed here. That needs investigations. This that render task list. Task elements. Let's print those out. All right, let's make sure we have something that's actually going to print out. So it looks like, okay, there we go. So it looks like I was missing my return statement. You need your return statement if you're using curly braces. There's going to be a quick detour. But for fat arrow functions, so everyone's clear, when you do something like input and then output, this is kosher syntax for fat arrow functions. If you only have, one thing you need to input and one thing you want to return, as in one expression that you return, this is fine. But if you do something like inputs and then decide to use curly braces, then you need a return statement of output. Okay, so both of these are the same thing. Curly braces require return. The reason you want curly braces sometimes is because if you have more than one line, you need curly braces to add on there. So to highlight that, if I input Then curly braces, if I did something like console.log something, and then, return output. Again, this is why curly braces are required in this case, if you have multiple lines. Maybe make that a little more clear. Any questions on fat arrow functions? Just make sure we're on the same page. So I was missing a return here. Notice I have curly braces here. Even though I'm returning essentially one line, since I chose to use curly braces, I need to use that return there. Okay, let's keep trucking along. We're almost lunchtime. I know we're probably dying for a break, but let's kind of see if we get this and authentication going soon enough. All right. So notice we have buy donuts and do laundry. Let's click on one of them. All right, this should have given me my task list, but that seems to be missing. So we are at task list. Okay, looks like the route is incorrect. Oh, I know what. I think I need a leading slash here. That should make it good. Okay, there we go. So notice we clicked on a link. We're taken to the task page and it says buy some donuts, not done, due date. Okay, what should we do next? We need to do some CRUDing. I know that's going to be some bit of work, or we need to do authentication. I'll leave it up to you guys. Should we do the CRUDing part or the authentication part?
Authentication.
Okay, let's do authentication. So we commented stuff out in the back end. Let's uncomment that. Okay, so that is there. We need to create a login page up front. So on the front end, we need a login page. Login page. Let's hack this up quickly. So React class-based component, login page. We're going to need some form. Method will be post. Actually, no. Method. Leave that off. Form. All right. Inputs will be username, and we need password too. Okay, username and password, those are gonna be your inputs. Probably could have that. Probably should have some labels, so we show something sensible. All right, it's not going to be the best looking form, but it should work. Break line there. And we need a button. So again, inside of a form, you do need a button with the type of submit. If you're outside of a form, you don't need that. Let's say login. Okay, well, let's add a route for that. So if I go to
Yeah,
my
Arthur,
router.
do you need your CSRF token?
I'm not sure if I need it for my front end. I think CSRF on the back end, but I could be mistaken. Let's see if this works. If it doesn't, we'll investigate that. Login page. Okay, let's see if that actually renders anything. Login page not defined. Well, that makes sense. All right, let's go to React/login. All right, so that's our form, not the prettiest. Maybe add a break line for my sanity. So break line. Looks like my labels actually need value. Okay, so that's our form. Let's add a header. And maybe a button on our homepage to link to that. All right, so we're gonna have a button that's gonna be a link. So probably want to reverse these. All right, so that button's gonna link to our login, and that button will simply be named login. Looks like we need to import that link component from React down. Okay, let's see what our homepage looks like. There's our homepage. Let's log in. All right, username, password. Let's four. Okay, looks like I have a warning. Let me just get rid of those fours. Again, 4 is a reserved keyword in JavaScript, so there's an alias. So you got to use 4 HTML. It looks like, but I don't really need those. All right, so when we actually submit this form, we need to handle it. How do we do that? On submits, do some handling. All right, handle login. Let's create that method. Handle login. That will take in an event. Let's call it E. Remember, we want to call E prevent default. That's going to prevent us from refreshing the page, because by default, it would be a post that refreshes the page. Prevent default. So we want the default behavior, but we do want to get the values out of this. So I think we do let username equals e.target dot. What do you got to do here? All right, so we'll figure that out. So I think e.target dot username here. Console.log username. All right, so we're trying to get the values out of our form. We should call handle login when you hit submit. Let's test this out quickly. So if I type in Conquer, my password was that, I think. That should be a password field. Guess you guys saw my password. All right, so we got our fields, we want our value out of it. So we want dot value here. Let's see if that gives us what we want. Here we go. So we are able to get our value out. Again, this username is coming from the name that we gave our input. So it's a very common mistake is use ID or even just omit the name here. That is what the form uses to create these fields. So make sure you include a name value and then are extracting that field correctly. All right, so we have a username. Our password should be easy enough to access. So do e.target.password. Again, password is the name of the field we gave it. To be clear, we can name this, again, donuts. If we name that donuts, this would have to be donuts also. All right, so we have that. Let's create our user object. So let's credentials. And password. All right, so we're going to pass that back to our backend via our API call. All right, so we're going to create a new user. So how do we do that? If you remember, in our backend, if we went to API slash, what was it, login? If we go to login, we're able to make a post request. Remember, I'd logged in here with my username and password. So that's what we're going to be passing to this call. We're going to post to localhost 8000/login. So if I go to my APIs here, let's do const login, do login async. It's my base URL is going to be different, isn't it? That arrow function. All right, so we want to do our login. Our URL is going to be a little different than before. It's not actually going to be base URL. It's going to be http://localhost/
Localhost 8000.
Let's change this.
Would it be a good idea to maybe have like different base URLs for different kind of like API calls where you have like API URL and then login URL is constant?
Yeah, that's not a bad suggestion, but I'm going to be lazy here. I like the
Okay.
suggestion, but I just want to use one base URL and then add on to it. So base of this would be login. Let's try to wrap this up soon. All right, so login is where we're going to. We'll do a try, catch, fetch, and then the URL we care about. But we have credentials here. So this is going to be a post. Our first two were gets, right? So we actually need to pass in some additional information. So let's init equal, I don't remember the syntax for this, headers. Equals this, body, I think is what I want. So this is going to be a JSON dot stringify for my credentials. Headers method will be post. I'm not sure what else I need in there. Anyone remember? Do I need anything else here?
Application/JSON and method needs to be outside the head.
Gotcha. Thanks, Jack. Method should be out here. Post. And then application. Is it content type or application?
I'm checking.
That's right. Let me double check what I have over here. There's my API.
Yeah, just content type and then application/JSON.
Gotcha. Yep, just found that too. All right, so that should be good. These need to be colons though. Okay, so we're just basically stringifying JSON. So basically making this JavaScript object into a properly JSON format so we can send it. And then
Headers is also a colon.
yes, thank you. All right, so we need to actually pass this to our try catch fetch. So we'll pass in init equals none. Oh, we're in JavaScript. And then init can go here. I think that should work. Credentials assigned but never used. Did I mistype it? Oh, login page. Gotcha. Yep, so that's where we want to actually add our API call. I think this will be the last thing we do before lunch. I do want to finish this, so I might record it because there's still a lot to do here. Import to do API from API to do API. All right, so now we have our credentials. We could do try catch. I'm assuming there will be no errors, but yes. We get response equals await to do API. Looks like I didn't export it. So do login is what I called it. Do login. All right, so our login page we'll call to do API do login, pass in our credentials, and let's see what we get back. So assuming we get something back, let's call it data. All right, let's see what our data actually looks like. And hopefully it's something that we expect. All right, I think I wired all that correctly. We need an async function here. Data is not defined. Okay, looks like our server is good. Let's try our login from our front. All right, so login page. Try my correct credentials. Login. For not found, looks like I have that extra slash again. I need to be better about my base URLs. So don't need this slash right there. Just try this one more time. Okay, notice we got this token back. That is promising. So token, we also got our ID and username. So we can also like store that. So we want to store that somewhere within our application. We can store it in local storage also. The best way I think going about this is using context. So if you remember from our discussion of context, it's just a good way to kind of store data that's going to be used throughout our application. So let's create a context quickly. If you remember how to do that, let's call it user context. Okay, so user context here from import create context from React. All right, so we're going to use this to create our context objects. So const user context. And then we need to export this. Export default user context. Probably like to capitalize this. All right, so we have a user context. We could use that to provide data to wherever we need to. So in this case, we should be able to store our data or our token that we got back. So let's add a state value quickly. State equals user of null.
This is a function.
Oh, interesting. I guess I've been using class-based, my bad. Let's make this a class-based component then. Class app extends component. Component.
Component.
All right, cool. Extends component. All right, so we want to convert this class-based component. Good practice. Should be pretty simple. Let's render this and wrap my return value. So I think that's it. So in my state value, I want to use context. So to do that, I need to import my context. Cool. And now we want to set up a provider. So again, a provider is going to, anything you wrap under the provider is going to have access to data. So in this case, user context.provider value is going to be my state value. So this .state.user is going to be what I'm providing via this context. All right, let's see, we're getting into lunchtime, so promise I'll wrap this up soon. Okay, so this .state.user is what we're going to pass around via the context. We will need to assign it. So after we log in and we get that object back, so let's look at our login page. Just refresh ourselves. So we get, once we log in, we get that token and that other stuff back. We could just set that, pass that entire thing back to our parent function. So if you guys remember how to do that, our app is the one rendering our login page. Our app is interested in getting some data from the login page. In this case, the user information we're getting. So the proper way to do this is to actually pass down a prop to login page. That's going to be a callback function. So in this case, I'm going to call render and be this.render login page, which is a method I'll need to create. Render render login page. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to pass in an extra prop in addition to route props, potentially. So route props. All right, and we simply want to return a login page that takes in route props that we're going to spread apart so that it can be passed down appropriately. And then we also want to specify complete login. And that's going to be our method here. So in this case, create an anonymous function. We'll call this dot set state for our new state value. So that's going to update user with data. All right, that's kind of unsightly. I think it might make more sense just to create a helper function. So we could read this better. So helper function, say update user. You guys with me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know we're all probably hungry. So this dot update user. All right, so it's going to be a prop called complete login that the login page will get. It's going to pass back new user data, which we're going to just call this dot set state, and user is new user data. Data and login page. All right, so we have our data. Assuming that's good, we're going to call this dot props dot complete login and pass the data. All right, so now our parent should have that user set, and then any component that wants to use it. In this case, let's go to task list page, so that we can actually use the user here. So if you remember how to do this, one way we could do this is by setting the context on the class. So if I do task list page dot context type equals user context. Looks like that's imported for me. Great. Since I did this at the bottom for my class, I set the context type. I have access to something called this.context. So I can leverage that in my API call up here. So let token equal this.context. This.context token. I think that should be the value. And if not, we probably want something that's null. All right, so we need to authenticate this request. Without it, our backend will yell at us. So we go back to API. We should take in a token for our task list ID. Token, and that's going to be a new init object. All right, so we need an authorization, and our token. So we need to wrap that with JWT. Yeah, remember the syntax here. Right. Token. I think we need this JWT. I don't quite remember, but we'll give it a try. Credentials is not defined, and 2D API. Okay. Let's see if that takes care of it. Init, initialize use. All right, not sure if this worked, but if it doesn't, we'll get to lunch anyway. All right, so let's log in. Password, login. Login. All right, login page. Let's do a redirect. So if we log in successfully, let's redirect. So we do this dot props dot history dot push, I believe. Should let us redirect to our homepage. It's console log for data. So we actually know we logged in. All right, let's try that again. So that's. There we go. working a moment ago. Okay, we got our token this time. But we weren't redirected. Why were we redirected? Let's see if complete login gets called on our app. So app is passing down complete login. Should call this. Let's add a console log, make sure we're actually getting in this method. That's not good. Okay, I think this would be a good stopping point. Definitely want to figure this out though. So I'll continue going through lunch, but you guys probably need a break. I'll probably take a quick break too. But the idea here is we're getting the user info so that we could actually make authenticated requests to the backend. So we get that token, and that token should be our key to making calls to the backend. So I'm trying to set the goal right now that I'm stumbled on is I'm getting my data, which is my token. If I look at my console, that was working. All right, so I got some error. Cannot set property props undefined. All right, so it looks like I screwed up something. I'll debug it on my own. But all right, so yeah, so today your challenge is going to be rock, paper, scissors. Again, it is quite a hefty challenge. So again, we're going through a to-do list. It's going to be very similar where you got to create a backend. I think for the rock, paper, scissors challenge, it's actually the models are probably one of the hardest parts of the challenge. So let's go to today's. I'm not sure if anyone calls it rock, scissors, paper. I've heard paper, rock, scissors or rock, paper, scissors, but never rock, scissors, paper. Not sure who named that one. But yeah, so this goal here, again, if you're familiar with the game of rock, paper, scissors, you're basically throwing a random output of either rock, paper, or scissors, and your opponent is doing the same. And there's a hierarchy that, you know, rock beats scissors, scissors beats paper, paper beats rock. So you're gonna have to create some models for it. Again, it's not gonna be trivial, I don't think, to create those models. And then create authentication. So obviously, when you're playing a game, you're gonna be playing against either an AI or some other opponent, but you want to log like the victories and maybe the throws that they submit for the game. Yeah, so again, this is going to be definitely challenging. I would like to go over this on Friday, at least a little bit, after you guys have a chance to work on it. Again, remember tomorrow we have that web security workshop. But again, this is a fantastic challenge to kind of test out your React and your Django knowledge at this point. So again, it's gonna be similar to to-do list. I think a little harder than a to-do list challenge. So obviously it's gonna take some time, but definitely give it a try. And if you get stuck, that's totally fine. But I want everyone to at least attempt it. All right, so let me pause the recording here.